Queensland One Nation Senate candidate Steve Dickson has sensationally resigned after being filmed drunk in a US strip club. The vision shows Mr Dickson repeatedly touching an exotic dancer in Washington DC. Mr Dickson is also seen making crude comments and requesting sexual favours. It was filmed during an undercover Al Jazeera investigation which involved using a fake gun rights advocate who travelled to the US with Mr Dickson and One Nation advisor James Ashby last year in an attempt to drum up support from the National Rifle Association. One Nation leader Pauline Hanson described the clip as shocking and says it cannot be condoned. She has accepted Mr Dickson's resignation.
I have always spoken very highly of Steve Dickson, but the footage I saw last night cannot be ignored or condoned. I am both a mother of 3 boys and the only female leader of a political party in this country. I wouldn't tolerate my own children behaving this way towards women, and I cannot and will not condone my own candidates dealing with women in this fashion either. Steve's language and behaviour was unacceptable and does not meet my expectations nor the greater public's expectation.
And now here's election analyst Andy Green. He says Steve Dickson will remain on the One Nation ticket as the ballot papers have already been printed.
And Steve Dickson is number 2 on the ticket. He is still capable. He's on the ballot paper. People can vote for him. He can be elected. Pauline Hanson was disendorsed by her party back in 1996 and was elected when she was first elected as a Liberal. So people can be elected even if they've pulled out of the contest. But in this case, Steve Dickson is number 2 on the ticket. He's got 0 chance of getting elected. One Nation would need to poll something like 20% of the vote for him to be elected, and that's just not going to happen. The votes will all be the top of the ticket with Malcolm Roberts. He will not get a quota. Steve Dickson has got no chance of getting elected anyway.
Right, so this basically has no impact on the voting outcome in Queensland really at all?
No, it's the same as yesterday in the Northern Territory. The second Labor candidate was disendorsed as well. So this is the second candidate that's been lost in the campaign, but neither of them were in any seat where they could possibly get elected, so it doesn't matter.
But One Nation has had a pretty tough run already after that documentary aired a couple of months back. How do you believe this is going to continue to affect the One Nation vote?
Well, I think they clearly don't seem to be quite as organised as they were a while back. For instance, their website has still not got all their candidates up. They had named a whole bunch of candidates who won on their website. Fraser Anning's got the same problem. There's lots of names they've nominated for the election, and none of them are on websites. So there's a number of these parties that are just short of information on their things. I think they've been rather short. I think seem to have lost a bit of organisation compared to recent times. And the second thing I'd say is that they really have been buried by the avalanche of Clive Palmer advertising for the United Australia Party. I think it's taken away a lot of the oxygen on talking about preferences that otherwise Pauline Hanson would have had.
So taking that into account, do you believe the number 1 on the Queensland ticket, Pauline Hanson, is guaranteed of getting a spot?
It's Malcolm Roberts.
Malcolm
is number
Roberts,
1.
Sorry.
Malcolm Roberts, no, I don't think he is, because he's competing essentially with Clive Palmer for a seat.
Right.
The third LNP member, Clive Palmer, and Malcolm Roberts are competing for the same seat, the final seat in Queensland. There's an outside possibility that both could get it. I think that's extremely unlikely. But essentially, Clive Palmer's got a lot more capacity to win that seat. 1, he's got a lot more publicity. 2, he is number 2. He is getting a flow of preferences from the LNP on the how to vote card.
And Pauline Hanson's not up this time around?
No, she's not. She's a continuing senator.
Yeah. OK, and so how are things shaking out with Clive Palmer now? Last week when we had you here sitting in the studio, last time we chatted to you was when the Libs announced, so it became clear that the Libs were doing a preference deal with Clive Palmer's United Australia Party, and you said at that stage the biggest factor out of this is that everyone's going to be talking about Clive Palmer and over the next week, and that's exactly what's happened. So how are things now looking for the United Australia Party in the wake of that and in the wake of this morning?
Well, they said 5% in the poll yesterday, in the news poll, and that's a national figure, so it would be higher in Queensland, possibly 8 or 9% in Queensland. If they're getting 8 or 9% in Queensland, they're highly likely to win the last seat. They will get there on LNP preferences. So it's probably looking good for Clive Palmer if those polls are correct. If that's not a false response from people being asked that on a telephone, maybe they would respond differently on a ballot paper. The question is still, in terms of preference deals, will Clive Palmer's party, will the United Australia Party have people at all the key marginal seats handing out how-to-vote cards, which is what you need to do to make a how-to-vote important. Because if people just turn up to vote and they vote one for the United Australia Party and then give preferences how they like, then there's not going to be a strong file of preferences to the Liberal Party, I suspect.
And so it's not exactly clear at this stage how structured that United Australia Party operation is going to be on election day in terms of how-to-vote cards?
Well, if he's got $50 million to spend on television advertising, he can afford a little bit more for a few people to be paid to stand on how-to-vote cards. It's a matter of organisation. That's much more complex to organise than buying up advertising time.
And agreeing there.